defend rural America. First, I want to say thank you to our military men and women for defending our freedom and giving us this opportunity to speak about issues that we have. My title of the talk is The Connection Between the Health of California's Rural Communities and Poorly Managed Forests. I thank Steve Brink for some of the information here and some of the folks at the California Forestry Association. I thank all of you and Kirk for inviting me. I'm a college professor and I don't like being scripted, but I have to be because for fear of going up in smoke when the button is pushed by Kirk. So bear with me here. I do have a lot to say, and I need to say it in 10 minutes. My remarks today will focus on the serious concerns associated with the manner in which the federal USDA Forest Service is addressing forest management on our national forests in California. These forest management problems are pervasive in many national forests outside of California as well. I say with all humility that I'm a practicing forester, a Cal Poly professor, department head, a forest scientist, and a concerned citizen. I have served on many boards and important committees, for example, the California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, science boards appointed by the president and appointed by our governor. The Lord has blessed me. In all of this, I have seen that there's much conflict associated with how our forests and wildlands are managed here in California and the West. How can we bridge this conflict, this communication, and often partisan gap to bring about positive change for our rural California communities? Next slide. California enjoys a Mediterranean climate characterized by long, hot, dry summers and relatively warm, wet winters. This is a perfect climate for vegetation to grow, whether it's agricultural crops, your vegetable garden, or the forests of our Sierra Nevadas or our coastal redwood forests. This next slide illustrates Yosemite Valley just after the end of the Little Ice Age, which lasted from about 1750 to 1880. The Sierra Nevadas were a cold, dry place. Since then, as you'll see in this slide, there has been warming and it has been wetter. The vegetation responds to warm and wet conditions. Our forests are changing. The conifer growth, this next slide now shows that conifer growth is approximately 7.3 billion, that's with a B, billion board feet per year. Or interestingly enough, slightly more than the 7 billion board feet consumed by we Californians when the economy is doing well. About 4.8 billion board feet of the annual growth is on California's national forests. 60% of California is in some type of public land. And I have a second slide that helps illustrate a little bit about this total growth and the mortality that perhaps will help you see that a little bit better. But I'm really moving to this next slide, which is really informative. Up until the early 1900s, the Forest Service contracted to harvest up to 2 billion board feet of that 4.8 billion, or about half of that annual growth. Since then, only 300 million board feet per year has been harvested, less than 8% of the annual growth. This has created numerous problems. And these next two slides show the biggest impact. We've seen sawmills close, as you see here, and this next slide illustrates that that is, even though that first slide shows it up to 2008, the trend is continuing through 2011 and 12. And as I would like to get to this next slide, the forests are getting denser and denser. Instead of a sustainable 400 to 100 trees per acre on average, the forests contain 280 trees per acre, and some acres are even much higher. Vegetative water consumption goes up, reducing inflows to the streams. Perennial streams during the summer months typically lose 25% of their surface flow daily due to vegetation sucking up the water. Eventually the forest becomes so dense, there's just not enough water to sustain the vegetation. The trees become prone to insects, disease, and wildfires. This next slide shows a fire hazard map of California. Forest fires become catastrophic and uncontrollable. When a wildfire ignites, the results are usually devastating, as you'll see in this next slide. Commonly, more than 50% of the acres burned during are considered high severity, what we call incinerations. Wildfires become the controlling large disturbance on national forests. That's right. Large disturbances, primarily wildfire, control what happens on our national forests. Not you and I, not the public agency that we call Forest Service. Next slide. Natural resources are destroyed, or if you think that's an overstatement, then let's say radically changed to such an extent that decades and centuries are required for their recovery. We see here, this next slide, spotted owl habitat. It's in marvelous condition, isn't it? Wildlife habitat is radically changed, thus leading to drastic changes in wildlife population. And as this next slide shows, our watersheds are seriously impacted. You might notice following large wildfire events in California that the media rarely talk about the aftermath of large wildfires, namely the devastating effects on our watersheds in the form of major increases in sediment rates and conversion of land from forest lands, as this next slide shows, to brush fields. The land in the foreground is Forest Service land. The land in the background is private managed forest products land that has been reforested. This next slide shows air quality is negatively impacted. California forest fires on average emit 3.5 times 2.5 micron particulate matter than all diesel consumed in the state each year. Forest Service managed forest management, or lack thereof, also affects the human environment, as this next slide helps to illustrate. Jobs and communities are eliminated. Back in the late 1980s, annual harvest of about half of the annual growth, as I've already indicated, the national forest contributed to about 36,000 jobs, direct, indirect, and induced jobs, to rural counties of northern and central California. And 25% of those timber sale receipts went to local counties for schools and roads and all kinds of wonderful things. Today, the Forest Service's annual harvest contributes to something less than 6,000 jobs. And the dwindling payments to counties ends in January. The media rarely, if ever, want to talk about the disintegration of the social and economic fabric of our rural communities. It's no secret that the occurrence of violent crime increases dramatically. You see illegal marijuana cultivation on public lands all over California, and so much more. The entire social fabric of our rural landscape is radically changed. And on top of all of that, California imports 70% of wood and paper that we consume. Think about that, folks. Today, the Forest Service California region admits that 60 to 70% of its productive forest land is in need of forest health treatment and fuels reduction. The forests are not healthy and cannot withstand these large disturbances. There are critics that would tell you that we should just let the wildfires burn. And in some cases, there's science to justify putting fire back in these systems. But these people also refuse to accept that society decided a long time ago that we will not allow these large fires to destroy our national forests. We passed laws that stated that. We will try to suppress them, and we should be trying to suppress them. In 2007 and 2008, California and the Forest Service collectively spent over $1 billion per year suppressing wildfires. This year it could end up being similar. The Forest Service spends half of its entire budget on firefighting and only about 10% towards forest health and fuel reduction projects. If our national forests were actively managed and the unmanaged productive forest lands were thinned and brush and small trees removed, we could expect at least a 23% reduction in acres burned. And I think that's very conservative. I think it would be even higher. And a net 65% reduction in air quality emissions. Last and just important, we could expect up to 1 million acre-feet more water, less vegetation, more water. We can watch our national forests burn up, or we can step in and demand that these problems associated with what many consider mismanagement of California's national forests be corrected. Doing so would result in 30,000 plus new jobs, a million acre feet more water, 23% less acres burned annually, and dramatically reduced air emissions would be the environmental benefits. I'd like to move to my last slide. We are smart people here in California. We all make a difference, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans. What is needed is good leadership, a process where all opinions are heard and respected, a defined and accepted desired future condition. When I asked folks who represented both sides of the forest management issues here in California at a 2010 California Board of Forestry and Fire Protection and Forest Management Committee meeting, what their key concerns are, they listed the following. And these were liberals and these were conservatives. They all agreed managing forests to ensure healthy forest conditions to meet a variety of objectives. Managing California's forests to reduce fuel loading and associated risk of catastrophic fire. And 3, this was the one that surprised me the most, there was full agreement. Managing California's forests such that landowners and the public agencies are encouraged and motivated to maintain California's working forests. The choice is clear, folks. Working together, we can make a difference. I remain optimistic, and I'm a proud American. Thank you very much.